Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar from the Youth Engagement Community of Practice. Today, we are collaborating with colleagues from the Youth Excel team. This webinar is being led by myself, Farida Makame, Community of Practice Champion, and my youth advisor, Christabel Letendo. She hasn't joined us yet, but she'll be joining us later on. Okay. So I'll talk a little bit about the Youth Engagement Community of Practice and what our objectives are. So we want to promote positive youth development approaches to advance outcomes in youth programming. And our aim is to do this through creating a member-led collaborative space to share ideas about resources and knowledge on youth engagement, but also to promote peer-to-peer experience sharing of best practices and existing resources, and to nurture a member-led technical network within the community offering practical tips to challenges faced by members. So please feel free throughout the engagement with us to share what you know about the different subjects that are being presented, but also to share some of the challenges we are facing, and our speakers and ourselves will try our best to help brainstorm on solutions, but also the participants in this webinar will also do the same. So feel free and safe to share different things that you have that relate to the topic. So I will hand over this mic now to Zaira from Youth Excel team to lead us through the session. So today's session is a little bit different. The Youth Engagement Community of Practice will not be leading the webinar, but our colleagues from the Youth Excel team, they will be leading it and introducing a really interesting topic around research. So Zaira, if you can take it from here.
Thank you so much. So welcome everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever you are in the world. So welcome to today's sessions, Research to Change, Localizing Youth Leadership in Implementation Research. Hi, my name is Zaira Lainez. I am the Gender Equality and Social Inclusion Officer of Youth Excel, and I am based in Guatemala. And I also want to introduce to you the amazing facilitation team that is joining me today from the Youth Excel team. We have Silvia Canano, who is the project lead based in Kenya. Brian Betaya, who is the technical advisor based in the US. And also Brenda Shum, regional program officer based in Guatemala. So in the next slide, we want to open today's session with some group reflection. We want you to reflect on the following questions you can see in the slide. So you can also use this time to introduce yourself in the chat, say your name, where are you based, and also share with us first, why does research matter? And the second question, why doesn't research always inform practice? Think about your own experience or other experience you have been able to see. So let's give some time to see some answers in the chat. Again, for you, and remember that there are no right or wrong answers, only share your experience. Why does research matter? And why doesn't it always inform the practice? Yes, the second question. So you will see that we will be sharing with you how implementation research is something that we want this research to inform practice in our programs. So we always, not often we do research and it doesn't always informs the work that we are doing. So we want research to be useful. Okay, thank you everyone. I am seeing a couple of answers in the chat. Please keep posting your reflections in the chat and keep introducing yourself, saying hello. In the next slide, here, okay, Today was designed to be an interactive session, so that's exciting to see all of you very active in the chat here. So please keep doing that. So as you see, today we will be learning about Youth Excel implementation approach, which is called Research-to-Change. And we will see the role of implementation research for the advancement of positive youth development programming. We will also be pausing and reflecting. We want to share insights on key concepts with you. We will also be exploring the Research-to-Change Toolkit, and we will have the opportunity to interact with it as it relates to your own work. And we will be also sharing this real world application to our in this session, and we will also listen to how we all apply the implementation research to our own work with some breakout room exercise. And we will also hear stories from the Youth Excel program that showcase the power of youth-led implementation research. Finally, I am going to show you the overview of the workshop of today in the next slide. We will have a brief introduction of what is Youth Excel. Then we will introduce what is implementation research, which Youth Excel has branded it as Research-to-Change. Then we will have a time to know about some implementation research case studies. And then we will have most of the time for all of us together to explore together the toolkit. And we will be having some breakout rooms to share how we could together use implementation research in our own work. And finally, we will be closing with some call to action based on what we have all learned today together here. So now I am going to pass it over to my colleague, Sylvia. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Zaira. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you are joining us. Thank you so much for being with us today. So maybe before I get started on Youth Excel background, I was just looking through the chat for some of the comments on the questions of why doesn't research always translate or inform into practice or inform practice. And I've seen a couple of interesting responses. I've seen one around there's resistance to change, even if evidence, exists. There's another point on results are not analyzed and so also not applied. And there's there's sentiments around it being academic heavy and therefore not realistic. So I think those are important points that are raised that hopefully will help us understand why implementation research. So if we look at the next slide, what you see there are some of the challenges or the problem that led to the birth of Youth Excel. And so what Youth Excel seeks to do is to be able to address a couple of these barriers. I'll just read through briefly. So one of them is there is not enough in the way of evidence in terms of what works in youth programming. So what can we say is best practice, for instance, when it comes to youth programming? Additionally, one person had talked about the fact that research is academic heavy. I think I also saw the word complex somewhere. And so there's that notion that this is not for me. And so we see that that could be a reason. You see that youth are not engaging in research. So you have youth organizations that are doing, really good work, but they're not taking the time to learn from their work. They are not, and perhaps there could be need to increase their capacity for conducting this kind of research and to strengthen their programs. And then another problem in Youth Excel that Youth Excel seeks to address is the issue of power differential. So we have decision makers who are separate from youth, and so youth are not able in all cases to be able to contribute to decisions that affect them and their communities. And so, how they have a stifled voice, and yet they are a key stakeholder group that need to be involved when it comes to decision making. And lastly was the issue of how to be able to effectively channel resources to local organizations. And so looking at on the next slide, some of the things we are embarking on to address these challenges. The commitments we make are mainly fourfold. And so one of them that is around how can we generate research and evidence for youth programming. And related to this is how then helping to strengthen the capacity for young people to do their own, in their own programming. So how can we then make, or how can we have young people leading their own research? And we'll talk a lot about that today. The other thing that Youth Excel seeks to do is to tackle these differentials in power that exist between either duty bearers, decision makers, and youth. So how can we make sure we have underrepresented groups? How do we make sure we have youth who are involved when it comes to decision making? And lastly, we want to be able to support organizations in the work that they do by supporting them to financially, supporting them in terms of capacity strengthening and so forth. And so these are some of the things that we do in Youth Excel to address the challenges that we had talked about earlier. I'll pass this on to Brian to talk more about implementation research.
Thank you, Sylvia. So you've heard us talk about implementation research a couple of times. It's in the title of this event. So let's dive into what do we mean when we say implementation research, and specifically within the Youth Excel program. Next slide. So it might be helpful to start with what implementation research is versus what it's not. So first, implementation research is not only conducted by research experts. Implementation research is conducted by or closely with implementers. I'm reflecting personally on this barrier that people were talking about, that research can be a bit too academic and a bit disconnected from practice, right? Second, implementation research is not separate from the work of implementation. Implementation research is integrated within the work of implementers while engaging existing implementation efforts. And this is to promote sustainability and use of findings in a continuous way. Third, implementation research is not limited to specific types of data collection or methods. Implementation research is inclusive of many forms of data and many types of research methods, things like existing monitoring, evaluation, learning efforts. You can leverage those for implementation research. People often will ask the question about, like, what's the difference between this and participatory action research? There's a lot of similarities and overlaps here. We try not to focus on those methodological distinctions. Third, implementation research is not primarily focused on creating publications or reporting findings to donors. Implementation research is primarily focused on achieving the learning priorities of implementers for real-time evidence use. That is really, really key. A key barrier that I saw earlier is that often the findings from research come too late to impact implementation. This is really about using evidence in real time. Implementation research is not a one-time research project. Implementation research is a continuous learning and adaptation journey that has potential for organizational capacity strengthening and sustained use. And last but not least, implementation research is not meant to meet every research need. And I cannot emphasize this enough. Implementation research is not an impact study. It is not a randomized controlled trial, all these different methods, which are great for answering a host of different questions. But implementation research is really meant for the implementers to make data-informed decisions within their local context in real time. Next slide. So our team landed on 4 principles that guide implementation research across all of our activities. First, it champions the leadership of implementers in research for the real-time use of evidence. Second, it explores how and why programs work under real-world conditions. Third, it is participatory, iterative, and inclusive. And last but not least, it helps organizations gather data, take what they learn, and turn it into what they do in real time. I'm going to post a link here into the chat. It's how we've thought about implementation research and approached it across our work. Feel free to save that and visit it after the discussion today. But I want to take a moment to pause and hear from you all. What are some questions that you have so far about implementation research? You can feel free to come off your mute and speak, or you can feel free to type your answers into the chat.
Yes, Brian, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you very much for this wonderful presentation. So I'm Ahmad from Nigeria. I'm just curious to know, this research, is it done directly by the implementers, or can also be done by third party. Yeah, so thank you.
Yeah, that's a really great question. So implementation research is something that can be led by implementers, but if you are in the space of evaluation, there's a lot of this new frontier of evaluation, which is about co-creation, right? So evaluators and third parties can co-create implementation research efforts with implementers to center their learning priorities within all of their learning efforts. Was that a helpful answer, Ahmed?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. So I see a question from Amelia. It says, how do you effectively ensure data quality across multiple regions in implementation research? That's a really great question. And specifically within Youth Excel, that's been a challenge that we've been trying to address, starting from the basics of how do we focus on basic skills in data cleaning. But again, when you say multiple regions, I want to emphasize that it's really focused on the local context. So an implementation research project in Colombia, per se, is going to look really different from an implementation research project in another context, and they don't necessarily have to be comparable across these contexts because it's really focused on what's happening locally. Thank you for that. Brittany Anderson asks, are implementation researchers contracted through Youth Excel, or are program personnel equipped with the tools to do their implementation research on their own programs? That's a great question. And a great logistical question. So specifically how we do it through Youth Excel is we do hire some consultants, but mainly their role is to facilitate the youth-led and implementer-led research through capacity strengthening workshops. And we'll get into it later, but you'll see some of the tools that we use. These are all great questions. We'll move on for now, but if you have questions as it goes on, feel free to type them into the chat and I'm happy to try to answer them as we move forward. So I wanted to discuss another framework that we kept in mind across all of our work in Youth Excel, and specifically when we designed our implementation research approach, and that's positive youth development. So I wanted to, next slide, ask a question first. Have you all heard of positive youth development framework before? And if so, how would you describe it? Okay, it seems like it's going to be new for some people here. I'm excited. Okay, Brittany Anderson says yes. So we have someone that knows it. Empowering youth, leading youth programs, valuing youth engagement and voice. Yes. Positive youth development is a framework that focuses on the strengths of youth rather than the weaknesses. Yes. It's very asset-based and focusing on the positives. All right, next slide. So I want to take a moment to introduce you all to, or reintroduce you to those who are familiar with the USAID Positive Youth Development Framework. It focuses on 4 different interlinked domains that contribute to healthy, productive, and engaged youth. And those domains are assets, agency, contribution, and enabling environment. Next slide. So thinking of these 4 domains and how they connect to the implementation research framework that we shared, let's go domain by domain. So for assets, implementation research offers skill strengthening activities and opportunities around research methods. For agency, implementation research offers a space for young implementers to set research agendas and setting and achieving research goals that they establish on their own terms. For contribution, implementation research recognizes and elevates the voices of youth implementers. And for enabling environment, implementation research values and recognizes the leadership of youth implementers in research for real-time use. And it also challenges existing norms around who's allowed to do research and have it allows for a more inclusive environment where data and evidence can be used. Next slide. So with the PYD approach and with implementation research all in mind, we've recently released a toolkit for youth-led and youth-serving organizations to realize the promise of implementation research for their programs. The purpose of the Research-to-Change Toolkit is to guide practitioners through the process of planning and conducting implementation research and connecting data to decision-making for their work. It includes 7 different interactive learning modules and a quick start guide for implementation research planning. You may notice that we've decided to rebrand implementation research as Research-to-Change. This was very purposeful. We did this to improve the accessibility and ownership of implementation research for young leaders, and focusing in on a core tenet, which is that research is meant to enact change. The process here is just as important as this product. We designed this with our global consortium and tested its contents in 12 different countries with 70 organizations. And through these different research cycles, we've seen a total of 132 plans for research to change created to date. And we've gathered feedback in real time to incorporate and bake that into the final product to reflect those feedback. And we're really excited to say that it's currently available on the YouthLead platform, and it's there as a public good. Feel free to explore it and use it, and we'll be sure to share that link later during the presentation. So we wanted to give some case studies on implementation research and how it might look. But before we share these case studies, it might be helpful to have an overview of what implementation research might look like for an implementing organization. So you heard me mention the different interactive modules. They're here on the right side of the screen. But here's how it might look. So first, you would discuss your implementation priorities and establish some learning goals as a team. Second, you would develop and implement a light touch data collection strategy to achieve time-bound learning goals. Again, it's light touch, it's time-bound, it's meant for real-time use. Third, you share key findings and hear feedback from others. And last but not least, you use what you learn to strengthen your implementation and establish new learning goals. And as you'll see here on the right, it is a cyclical cycle, a continuous type of effort. So let's get into some practical examples. The first one that we have is from Vision and Action Cameroon and Africa Youth Movement, and some of the work that they've been doing on school-based menstrual health and hygiene. Next slide. So they had this learning goal. We need to know whether school administrators and students see our comic book strategy for menstrual health and hygiene education as relevant for education around menstrual health and hygiene, so that we can modify our strategy to better meet their needs. This organization had the following learning goal, they conducted key informant interviews with school administrators and shared a survey with students, and they found the following. They found that several school administrators had recommended that the comic books would be more effective if they were paired with some peer-to-peer engagement and learning. 80% of students felt that comic books would be a relevant method for communicating the materials, and 62% of students currently were reading comic books. They made the following decisions based off of this. So first, they used the comic book strategy as the majority of the students and administrators saw it as relevant. And they also complemented the comic book strategy with a peer-to-peer approach. Through these decisions, they realized the following benefits. First, they had really high levels of interest in the comic books from various school actors. They had libraries coming to them requesting copies for sustained distribution within the schools. And second, student demand was really, really high for the school champion peer-to-peer trainings. And they actually had to expand a bit to accommodate that. And through this research, they really found how to generate high demand for this activity. Next slide. So here's another example from the Biz Nation, our youth-led partner organization in Colombia. They had the following learning goal. We need to know the internet access of potential participants so that we can provide resources to overcome barriers to online engagement. And this was focused on a digital marketing course that was integrated within an existing youth engagement program. So it was a partnership with an existing program. They collected some data through registration forms with participants, just adding a few extra questions about internet access. They found that 84% of students reported having access to the internet, and it was a little bit lower for those who identified as minorities. From this, they made two different decisions. So first, they distributed SIM cards with internet access to all participants to address these issues. And second, they created WhatsApp groups to facilitate easier communication through the smartphones. They realized the following benefits. First, most of the students that participated in the online digital marketing course used their cell phones. Nearly 70% used it with the SIM cards provided. And second, students reported high levels of satisfaction with the WhatsApp group communications. Again, this is a really light touch data collection strategy, and it's meant to be that way. It's meant to tap into existing efforts and surface information in real time within context to inform decisions. And it's not about layering research, additional work, right, onto existing efforts. It's about integrating it. And that's what we see here. Next slide. So like I said before, the partner story who I shared is from the Biz Nation. They owned and used the data that they collected for their work beyond the learning goal that I shared on the prior slide. That's just a snapshot of their continuous journey. They used research and data to make a number of internal changes to their practice, including strengthening their inclusive development approach by creating a new gender and inclusion policy, training trainers, and collecting relevant data across many of their programs in accordance with this policy. They also decided to share their lessons learned with others by releasing an overview of their learning from this activity. And it's on Youth Lead. I'll go ahead and share that into the chat, and I'll pass it over to my colleague, Sylvia.
Thanks, Brian. So far we've seen some examples of how you can use implementation research. So we've seen the example of using a comic book to address menstrual hygiene education and stigma reduction. We've seen how we can use it to address challenges to internet access. And so this is yet another example from another activity we had. And so what's different here is that we tested an approach of collaborative research. So where we had two local youth organizations conduct research together. And so what we were able to see is that when they were able to come together to do research, we realized that, youth can be powerful, youth-led research can be powerful to solve systemic problems. So what's happening on this slide? So what we had was two organizations working on the area of identifying barriers to access for persons with disabilities. And so one organization, as you can see on the left, that is Youth Alive Kenya, we're able to conduct research where they realize as much as the government has instituted in place legislation that sets aside 30% procurement opportunities for youth, for women, and persons with disabilities, only 2% of this is accessed by persons with disabilities. On the other hand, the other organization, as reflected on the right, which is TINADA, was also able to conduct research and realize that about 70% of persons with disabilities have not received business support from the government, despite there being existing opportunities. So what did conducting this implementation research help to do? It helps them to see, or it helps to see the picture that if we don't have locally produced data, we risk a lot of resource wastage. So you can imagine how much, this is Kenya, how much the government of Kenya is investing in these opportunities, but they are not bearing fruit. So we have wasted resources, we have increased marginalization because they are still not, these opportunities are still not accessible to the people, the groups that it's intended to reach. So I'll share with you later along, a summary of this research in the chat right after I'm done. And so what we also saw from these groups is because of this research and through this work that they've been doing together, they have joined local county platforms, we call them technical working groups, sector working groups, where they can share their data with government officials, with other youth organizations. And this has provided them, or it gives them a platform through which they can be able to push for better usage of resources to be able to reach the intended groups. So on the next slide, what you see is a few things. So we collected like some sentiments from participants who have engaged in implementation research. And so these are from, like I said, we have done, or like Brian said, we've done this in different contexts. And so I think the main thing that we had from participants was around the fact that we don't assume things, we use data to understand what decisions to make. So you can see here quotes around research can yield good results. You can see some comments here around being able to create solid solutions, understand what the needs are. So there's a lot of excitement, interest in the area of being able to use evidence to strengthen programs, evidence to develop programs, and the like. All right, I want us to pause for a moment. And so we've seen a lot of examples, right? I know we have limited time, so we couldn't go into a lot more detail for each one of them. And so as you think about what we've shared in terms of the organization that was starting out a program that was using comic books they were able to find out what, that this is a good strategy, but we must couple it with something else to make it effective. From those who are able to understand how they can make their programs inclusive because of where there are digital barriers, and also how we can collaborate to do research to solve systemic barriers. So as you think about these examples that we've shared, if you could put in the chat, what are some of your initial reactions, and how do you think, if you think about the work that you do, and even if you just think about what you shared about implementation research or research to change, how do you think this can be used to advance meaningful youth engagement? So you're free to pop it in the chat, but I'll also pause in case you want to unmute and share orally. I think I saw a hand up. So if you had your hand up, please feel free to go ahead and speak.
I think it's amazing that the slide about the youth knowledge production that it had concrete impact on identifying barriers. I think that's really impactful, and I could see that being really like something that really moves the needle at many organizations, or even like the policy way of making that case. So I'm curious. Also, there was an earlier slide, I think, that your colleague shared about the capacity, like building the capacity of youth to participate in research. I assume that's not just as that they're interviewed or surveyed, but rather that, I don't know, I just thought maybe if you could expand on that a little bit more. I was curious.
Of course. So I guess the question I'm hearing is, so how do we support then youth to be able to use, implementation research to strengthen their programs? So Brad may have mentioned part of this. So first and foremost, I think the important thing to keep in mind is that youth are the ones who lead their research. So they design their learning goals, they design what they want to learn, and they decide how they're going to use what they've learned. So it's very focused on the youth organization. So what we do is we provide the tools. We work with various partners across the globe, and so we provide the tools, this being one of them that we are talking about today, the Research-to-Change Toolkit, which is like the all-in-all of this is how we conduct research. We have them for a while, work side by side with our consultants just to get to understand how to do the research. And then and we always have like Brad is a technical point of contact, so you're able to consult, to check on, to find out how things are going. But what we've seen is that once the partners get the hang of it, it's something that they can easily use even beyond Youth Excel work. So it's providing that on-ramping support at the beginning, and then giving them tools to continue with this this method of being able to learn as they go along implementing their programs. I hope that answers your question.
Yes, thank you so much. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. I'm just going to go to the chat. I think I've seen some comments. Yeah, I totally agree, Lisa, that as youth, it's important to be at the forefront of change. And that's what you loved about the case studies. Thank you for that. There's a comment here from Tom. Very practical and compelling overview of practical knowledge action approach. I think the word practical has been used there 3 times in that chat, and that's exactly what. Remember when we started out and we were talking about these are the challenges, it's complex, it's not realistic. So those are some of the things we really did want to address. I think we have time for one more comment, and I can see Eman's hand is up, so please go ahead.
Thank you, Sylvia. Jambo ya kwanza. My question is, how do we, in your experience, how do we balance the truth of what is on the ground versus what the donors' interests are? A lot of time, people are very good in answering research questions with a bias that, this donor leans towards this, let's say things that pleases him, the donor, or things like that. And so I'm wondering, as the consultant works with the youth and train them on data collection and things like that, there seems to be, for me, there's probably a very thin line for being an objective research and one that that says, let's do this because we know this donor will fund this activity. Over.
Yeah, thanks, Iman. Those are really solid points you bring up, probably even beyond the scope of this conversation. But yeah, you're touching on points of like whose interests are we serving in when we are collecting research? Is it the interest of the donor? Is it the interest of the local community? And I think that's a very important framing, because one of the things we know is that if we don't have locally led development, we may not be able to see the impact. In other words, if we're only doing something to please the donor, then we may not end up achieving what we want to achieve on the ground. But in Youth Excel, we do want to change that narrative by having evidence. So one of the things is evidence opens doors. I can say research opens doors for stakeholders to give you a listening ear. We've done this this method of research in a couple of countries, and one thing I've seen is that when you, as a youth-led organization, present your findings, when you have evidence to go with, this is why I'm advocating or I'm justifying a certain approach or a certain program, you're seen as more credible. You know, someone is willing to give you an ear. And so I think personally that this is a way of being able to push against that forcing down a development agenda that may not be relevant for the ground. And I think what I believe I'm seeing a trend of interest around locally led development versus just looking at funders' needs, but actually based on what works in the community where we want to have an intervention. So this is one such tool that can help us to identify that and push for, or rather to push against or push back whenever we know we are hearing things or being asked to do things that are not relevant or will not yield much fruit on the ground. Yeah. Okay, I think for the sake of time, I'll just move on, but I think these are really good questions. Please, if you have more, just keep putting them in the chat. I'm sure my colleagues will be able to look at that and answer as I proceed. Okay, so we are going to go into the next thing. So we've had about, we've talked about implementation research. We've shown you examples of organizations we've worked with that use implementation research. We've shared with you some of the results of that. And so what we want to do now, the thing here, I think the theme here is on being practical, is you want to explore using implementation research. Just looking at the next slide. There you go. So again, I know Brian had mentioned this, but just to emphasize, why do we have this Research-to-Change Toolkit, right? So the purpose of this toolkit is to make sure that you as a youth practitioner is to help you and guide you in the process of planning for, conducting implementation research, so that we can be able to connect, help organizations and yourselves connect data to decision making. So that way you can improve your own work. You can be able to make your programs more effective in what they are set out to do. And so I'm looking forward to us doing practical examples of this today. So if we move on to the next slide, something I would ask us to do. So I know we are in a very digital age. I always like having a pen and a paper near me wherever I am, but in case you prefer typing that out, that's fine. The point is to be able to have somewhere to write. So we are going to actually put ourselves in the mind of conducting implementation research, so we have a really good idea of how this is done. So please take some time, grab a pen or a paper or open a blank Word document, whichever suits you best. And so what we are going to be doing is, we want to learn about a concept and apply a concept to your own work. All right, so let's move on to the next slide. What we're going to do in this section is to identify a program. So looking at the next slide, we have a few instructions for you. So we want to put ourselves in the mind of an implementer who wants to use implementation research or research to change to improve their programs. And so what we want you, first and foremost, what's important to remember as you identify a program is that research to change or implementation research can be used across a variety of programs. So whether you're thinking about a livelihoods program, a water and sanitation health program, a climate program, an education program, it doesn't matter. All programs can utilize the research to change approach. So think about a program, either one that you have implemented in the past, one that you are currently doing, or even one perhaps that you're about to start. So whichever phase you're in, just think about, I'll be quiet for a minute and give you time to do this, but think about a program. I think best would be something that you're currently doing and that you feel would benefit from using a research to change approach. So you want to understand and you want to learn something in that program. So just take some time, think about the work that you're doing, a program that you're doing, and then write that program down. So what's the program, right? What's the initiative? And then take some time to just briefly describe this program and think about, of all the programs that I could have written down, why did I choose this particular program? So I'll just give it a minute and be silent as you take down ideas, as we write down our ideas, whether that's on Word or a piece of paper. Okay, I'm going to take it that you've made some progress on this. So we'll just move on to the next slide. And so now we want to talk about the different stages of implementation. So if we go to the next slide, maybe before I get into this, just to mention that the decisions that you want to make about your program that will inform what you want to learn about will largely depend on where you are or which phase you are when it comes to implementing your program. So that's why it's important to start with thinking about, okay, where am I with this program? Yeah. And so in the toolkit, as you're going to experience later on in today's session, we talk about 3 main stages, right? And so the first one is when you're starting implementation. So here is where, before you really invest a lot of time and resources, you're exploring solutions. So think about the case, for example, that Brian shared of the organization that wanted to use a comic book approach to solve menstrual health challenge, education and stigma challenge, right? So that was before they started. They wanted to know, would this work? Would it be effective before we end up printing all these copies, distributing them in schools, just to hear a resounding, this is not working. So before you start implementation, right? So at that stage, either you have not started or you're literally just at the door about to start. And then the second stage you talk about is maintaining implementation. So here, this is where you've actually started implementing, you're at some stage where you've done some activities. And so what you have seen at this is what you set out to do on paper, and then there's what is actually happening on the ground. And you want to understand, why am I having these gaps? Why is this not working the way I assumed or I thought it would work? So addressing those gaps that we see between what we thought would happen and what's actually happening. And then the last stage you talk about that helps us to determine the priorities that we have when it comes to research is on the expanding implementation. So here is where you have really, made progress in your activity, in your program. And so you're coming to a close, you're coming to the end or have ended your program, and you want to now use that, you want to use the research here to guide you, for example, on the next phase of the programming or on a next program that you're going to embark on. So here it's about addressing new challenges. So now that you've had like some program achievements, you want to learn something on that. Okay. So if you could take some time, so just like before, we want to do some reflections. So last time we took some time to think about what program do we want to address and why do we want to address it, right? So now we want to think about the program that you've written down either in a Word document or on a piece of paper. Which stage are you in? Are you just starting? Are you somewhere in the middle of implementation, or are you at the tail end of the activity, right? So what stage are you in? And so as you think about what you want to learn at that stage, so first you've identified the stage you're in. What decision-making priorities do you have for your program at this time? So what do you really want to learn about your program that if I learn this, I know I can make this program better. So what is a priority for you in this area? So just like before, I'll just give us a minute or so to jot this idea down on a piece of paper or on our document. Okay, I think we've had enough time to at least put 1 or 2 ideas down. We'll still come back to this in a few, so I'll pass it on to my colleague, Brian. Over to you, Brian.
Thank you, Sylvia. Now it's time for us, now that we've thought about what program we might be working with and what stage that program would be in, now it's time for us to think about how to set learning goals within that current implementation stage. And to our users of the toolkit and participants of the Youth Excel program so far, we've been presenting learning goals as statements that can guide their research planning that will help to make these data-informed decisions. Next slide. So I wanted to talk about what a learning goal is. These learning goals should detail the information that you need to make for a decision in the near future. It's not a statement about what your program needs to achieve in the long term. Learning goals should detail the information that you need to make a specific decision in your current implementation stage that is aligned with your decision-making priorities. And also these learning goals will help you to identify the information that you need, and that will be the driving force of your research plan. Next slide. So in the toolkit and with our users, we introduce the process of creating a learning goal through a simple fill in the blank prompt. And it goes, we need to know, fill in the blank with information so that we can fill in the blank with a decision that you'd like to make. Next slide. And using this simple prompt, we learned a lot about what youth implementers care about. We've included a sample of these learning goals here on the screen here on the screen in case you'd like to review. And these learning goals, I just wanted to state, really reflect current decision-making priorities and information and data that they need to achieve them. Behind each of these learning goals is an organization that is taking ownership of data and research to use data in real time and achieve their implementation goals and priorities. So this is the interactive portion of the session where we'll get to actually open up the toolkit and play with it a bit. And we're going to be doing this in breakout rooms, and it'll be facilitated by myself, Sylvia Kananu, my colleague Saira Linus, and my other colleague Brenda Schum. And we'll be the note takers for the conversation, so don't worry. We'll be able to share the screen and talk you all through the implementation research toolkit, or the Research-to-Change Toolkit. And we'll be able to share back when we get to the large group. So with that said, let's go into the breakout rooms.
Everyone is back.
All right. So we wanted to have a moment to hear from you all. What was your experience like in the breakout rooms? What types of, if a learning goal came out of it? I want to hear from you all. Feel free to share with your mic or through the chat. I know in my group we had some fun. We put on our imagination hats and made up an education program. Yes, Kelly?
Yes, well, in our case, it was very good because we identify more the learning goals and how we can see more the KPIs in research about youth.
Thank you for that.
Brian, in our group, we didn't have time to finish, but we were almost there. So Glory was very passionate, sharing with us the program, her idea. So it was really great to hear at least about 4 different programs ideas, but which is the one from Glory. And it was very interesting because it was difficult to focus only in one learning goal because she has a lot of questions because it's at the starting point. So there is a lot of information still to look for. So I don't know if Glory or anyone else from the group would like to share your main insights.
Hi, I don't know if you can see my hand up, but I'll jump in. Zara, thank you for sharing that. And I was waiting for Kathura Glory to share because it was her program idea that we went with. But as Zara mentioned, there were like a few program ideas and then a lot of questions that Glory had. But I think for me, a key takeaway was that there are a lot of questions and that it is really important to go through this process with everyone that's involved so that you don't, miss any steps and that everyone sort of is involved in that process. So I think that was a key takeaway for me, considering such the time, the short time frame that we had, but in reality, that also happens too when you're, working. So it sort of replicated that. So that was a key takeaway for me.
Thank you for that. And yes, this was a very condensed exercise, and it really does take some time, and it's best when you engage the entire team. Thank you for that reflection.
I see Atef's hand. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Well, I really enjoyed discussions about that, yeah. And I'd like just to contribute that forming learning goals is very important in just for planning and implementation and the processing. But what I wanted to say that when we just wanted to form the learning goals, we have to give more attention to the standards of the goals. I mean, the criteria of learning goals. And I think that all of you know that, the learning goals must be smart. And the smart here, it must be specific, measurable, attainable, and realistic, and at the same time it's time bound, which is very important in forming the learning goals. So do we follow the SMART goals in our forming goals according or based on the SMART? That is what I wanted to say. Thank you so much. Yeah.
That's a really thoughtful point. These learning goals, they take time, one, to make, and two, they take time to accomplish. So like working with your team to decide and prioritize what learning goals to put in the forefront and which ones might be saved for a later time based on those SMART criteria is really key. And we do a lot of work with our participants through Youth Excel. They'll come to us with a few learning goals and we'll brainstorm together and we'll say, okay, like what feels most urgent at this time? And what do you think is reasonable to achieve by X time, and maybe we can put the other ones to the back. So thank you for sharing that. It's important to prioritize. Ahmed?
Yes, thank you, everyone. For me, I'm like very, very happy because of the toolkit. Sorry. So for me, it's like very straightforward, and it encourages the team to work together, come up with an idea. So I'm just thinking, and I'm very happy for the time taken for those that develop the toolkit, because it's just like working with a context-based checklist and coming up with this toolkit. I am very, very happy with it, and I hope maybe you can share it across our email so that we can work with it. Thank you very much.
Yeah, Brian, if I can just share back, I know we're almost out of time, but if I can just share back from our group. So we did land on a program, and so this was therapeutic foster caregiving. And so this was, I think, like what I've had in some of this, what's been shared, this was at the starting phase of implementation. And I really liked what Brittany shared was like, rather than have a whole trial and then from that trial see how to go about the program, why don't we do something lighter so that we can have a fix as you go kind of model. And so that spoke so well to like how Research-to-Change works. So I thought this would be pretty relevant. And so we didn't really come up with learning goals, but we came up with what? About 7 decision-making priorities. So like things around how do you make this culturally relevant? How do you work with birth parents in a way that they see foster care not as a replacement? So how do we make sure that we are meeting youth needs? So very relevant questions that Research-to-Change can answer. And it was pretty exciting, but we didn't have enough time to like go down to we need to so that, but it was a really good discussion. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Sylvia. As we move on to the call to action, I just want to say like these things take time. That is so true. We can't cover it all in this short session that we have with you all, but we hope that it gave you a taste of what implementation research is and what this toolkit and how it can be used to engage your team in the process of implementation research. So feel free to explore the toolkit. I did put the link here in the chat. In the quick start guide, you can start plugging your learning goal and get going. So thank you all so much for these reflections and these thoughts. It's been a pleasure. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Saida.
Thank you, Brian. So we want to close this great session today with a call to action. So in the next slide here, we have put some ideas. First, we invite you to be a champion for youth-led implementation research. I think we have heard through the whole session how passionate you are about what you are doing. And I think you all can be great advocates for youth-led research. So advocate for your peers. Another call to action, please go ahead and use this toolkit. My colleague Brian just shared with you again the link in the chat. You all had the opportunity to try it, you see how practical it is. So please use this toolkit to apply implementation research to your own programs. And feel free to contact us if you have any question. Use this to co-create programs with youth practitioners and take the space, take the leadership as youth. Also, let's create opportunities to learn from implementation. Co-create with youth, and this is a great opportunity for all of us to shift power and be open to learning. And as we are closing out, we want to share with you a couple of questions for you to keep thinking after this session. What are some concrete actions you can take within your organization to promote youth-led implementation research? You can start sharing in the chat, and please keep thinking about these questions and share with your team. And another question, how might you use the implementation research in your work? Please feel free to share some of your first ideas, your first thoughts in the chat. And okay, as we are closing and reading your answers in the chat, I want to close in the next slide. Please follow our social media pages and subscribe to our mailing list to stay engaged with our work. So you will see here some links for signing up for the newsletter. You can follow us in Facebook and Twitter, and also visit the web pages in the IREX website and Youth Lab's website. Please let us know how you've been doing this, how it has been working with you. If you have any feedback, please, we will be really, really happy to hear back from you and to see how implementation research is being used in different parts of the world and context. So thank you so much. And over to the team that is leading this session.
Thanks, Zaira. Thanks everyone for joining the session. My name is Christabel Netondo Nyongesa. I'm the youth advisor for the Youth Engagement Community of Practice, which has collaboratively worked together with Youth Excel to bring to you this wonderful toolkit, the Research-to-Change Toolkit. So wondering about our community of practice and how you can join the Youth Power tool learning and evaluation. I will drop a link on the chat, whereby in order to join, you have to register on the youthpower.org website. The link is on the chat. And then you can connect with us through the Youth Engagement Community of Practice when you scroll down. So through the CoP, you'll be able to engage in the discussion group and also be aware of the future events within the Youth Engagement Community of Practice. Next slide, please. And how can you engage with our community of practice for youth engagement? One, you can get involved as a speaker or a panelist in any of the upcoming community of practice webinars and events. You can as well share your expertise from your program in any small working groups, perhaps maybe to improve a tool or to modify it. You can as well join our discussion groups with other members to review literature on youth engagement or on positive youth development. And lastly, you can attend and participate in the quarterly webinars within the community of practice. And if you're interested in this, or in any way you feel like you'd want to be involved with a CoP, you can send an email to us, the champions, Farida, who I believe introduced herself at the start, and then myself through these emails. And next slide, please. And then lastly, our upcoming Youth Power Learning Network and events. These are our sister community of practice within the Youth Power Learning Network. So you'll find all the details, the topics, and what you need to do to register on the youthpower.org events page. One of the upcoming events is on Thursday, July 28th. It will be held by the Business Entrepreneurship Private Sector Engagement Community of Practice on the topic of World's Learning LMA case study from Iraq. And on August 10th, the Middle East and North Africa Youth and Youth System Strengthening Community of Practice in collaboration with the Global Communities Youth Power Jordan. They'll be having a session on youth system change, lessons from Jordan. So feel free to check out on the youthpower.org events page to find these and more events that are upcoming and the ones that we've already been able to showcase in the previous months. And next slide, please. And a wonderful thank you to you, youth programmers who've been able to join and learn. A wonderful thank you to the Youth Excel team for leading us through this wonderful research toolkit, and also for the Youth Power 2 Learning organizing committee for this session. Thank you all, and have a restful evening, morning, and afternoon. Sorry, before we close out, there's just a poll on the screen. What was your favorite part of today's session? You can choose more than one, and feel free to add more detail in the chat about your favorite parts or improvements you'd like us to make. So if it was about the research to change, you can click on that. If it was about brainstorming, you can click on that as well. All right. I think that will bring us to the end.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.